back, everybody. We're here with Pam. She is the podcast host of Cafe Con Pam. She also is a brand strategist, a photographer, and has a little phone pocket called Snoozeit. And we're excited to hear more about your journey and how you started all your businesses. And yeah, we're excited for you to be on our show today.
Thank you. I'm honored. This is awesome.
Yeah.
I've done other interviews, but not on video, so this is exciting.
Well, you see the woman behind all these businesses now, so we're excited to share her story. So can you start out just by telling us a little bit about where you grew up, how you grew up? Is there somebody in your family who was also had many businesses or was an entrepreneur?
Yes, I grew up in Mexico City. I was born in California. I moved to Mexico City when I was little. And I grew up there my whole life. Then my parents divorced. I'm a child of a dysfunctional family, so lots of back and forth moving between Mexico and LA. So I did school in LA, I did school in Mexico. Most of my life was in Mexico City. And then when it came time to do college, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I ended up moving.
Bore us with the details.
Well, I tried to go to UNAM in Mexico City because it's my favorite school. And you have to take a test, kind of like an ACT test. Mm-hmm. And I did it twice. The first time I think I needed 3 right answers. I was short 3 answers, and the second time 2. So I was like, this is not, I'm not,
Yeah.
My friends were like, try one more time, like maybe 2 more times and you'll get it. And I'm like, no, it's just, because you have to wait 6 months every time.
Oh, wow.
So it was a year of my life that I was just like,
dedicated
kind of
like
in limbo.
studying.
Yeah. I grew up and my grandfather was a lawyer that I grew up with, and he was of the mentality of get a career, and my dad is a musician by like nature, I guess, but his dad always asked for their children to have a degree because that was the path, right? So when my dad graduated college, he's an engineer, which is so funny because he has this like super creative, and he does all this holistic stuff. So, but he studied engineering. So once he graduated college, he actually gave his degree to his dad and was like, I'm done. Now I'm going to go pursue what I love, which is music and his other stuff. So I did grow up with a dad that was an entrepreneur. Then my mom, she was a flight attendant for over a decade. And when my little brother and sister came to the world, she started her own business. My grandfather, from my mom's side, my mom's dad, he had a business, until he died.
Yeah.
So all of that it's in my blood.
Kind of shaped you.
Yeah. But I still had the upbringing of my grandfather that was like, you have to have a career. Like, I'm very creative, so all of that stuff was not real. Like, you need to have doctor, lawyer, teacher, like those engineering, like whatever it is that's more tangible, I guess. And so that was like really put inside of my head. So when it came time to do college, I wanted to be an architect. And when I decided to come to the US, because I was born here, I was like, I have the privilege of having been born here. So I'm going to go to the US to go to college there. I had no idea how college functioned. 0 clue. No idea.
Yeah. And
so one uncle lived in Missouri. They still live there. And I was like, okay, so I'm either going to go back to LA, where all my family is, or go to Missouri, where one uncle lives. And I wanted to do that, like, not small city life.
Yeah.
Per se, because I had lived in huge cities my whole life. So I was like, well, let's see what this like Midwest life is.
So you chose Missouri.
So I chose Missouri. I went to Missouri. And I realized that college here functions very different. In Mexico, you go to a huge university, and then that's where you start, you go, and you finish. So when I found out that, when I told my counselor I want to be an architect, they were like, oh, well, you can do 2 years here, and then you transfer to a bigger school. And I was like, this is too much. Like, I already moved countries.
You already did a year of trying to...
Yeah, like, no. And so I decided to stay, and I studied graphic design and photography, which was still a career, but it was still kind of creative.
Yeah.
So
is there somebody that you saw that did that you were like, oh, I want to do graphic design and something more creative? was it something that you saw in a pamphlet and you're like, that's what I want to do?
No, I've always drawn and like doodled and done fun things.
Yeah.
And that was like the closest thing to, because architecture to me was left brain, right brain. It was like the perfect merge. And then in high school in Mexico, you choose 4 areas of, you have on your senior year of high school, you have the choice of 4 areas.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on what you want to study, that's the area where you go. So it's physics and mathematics, area 1. Area 2 is biology and chemistry. Area 3 is sociology, and area 4 is arts and literature. So I was in area 1, physics and mathematics.
Yeah.
So it was very left brain.
Yeah.
But that's when I wanted to be an architect, because you use your right brain to do the creative side and come up with like fun things, but then you use your left brain to do the numbers and the calculations and all that stuff. So what was the question?
was there something
that I saw?
Yeah.
No. So a long answer to a short question. I didn't, but that was the closest thing to being creative.
Yeah, I guess I say it from a point where like you're not used to the U.S. school system
at all,
and like a lot of even first generation students who are born here aren't used to the U.S.
Correct.
system, and so
you have no one to tell you.
Yeah, and so you kind of follow what you might see somebody else do, right? That looks like you're like, oh.
No, I didn't have anyone. I saw the brochure and I read it and I was like, okay, we get to draw and paint.
Yeah,
and that's cool.
No, that's awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't have a graphic designer that I looked up to, I guess.
Yeah. So you got your, you studied graphic design, did all that. What was next? Did you automatically get into entrepreneurship? Did you go and try to do something more corporate or actual job to please, some of your family or? Yeah.
So because I didn't know how the school system worked, when I arrived to Missouri, they were like, you're going to have to pay out-of-state tuition. And I was like, well, first of all, I don't know what that means. But from the numbers, I see that it's double the price.
Yeah.
So what can I do to not do that? And they said, well, you have to be a resident of the state. Well, what can I do to do that? Well, you have to have claimed taxes in the state. So I had to work full-time, or I had to work a year to become a resident of the state.
Oh, wow.
And so I had a full-time job. So when it came to school, because I had no idea how it worked, I funded my whole college. So I worked full-time and went to school full-time. And so...
How crazy was that?
It was insane.
Yeah.
It was insane. And I also was not in the best mental state. I had a really toxic relationship. I mean, it was a lot of stuff. So I just worked my way through it. And I started in the corporate world, like, since I was...
So did you keep the same job? And then after you graduated and did all that, you kept the same full-time job that you had?
No, I did. I started doing... Let me see. I haven't thought that far away back. It's been a long time.
Yeah, no worries.
But I started doing telemarketing. It was not telemarketing. It was collections. So I started as a bill collector, collecting auto payments, and that was so fun, so sad at the same time. It was insane, and it was fun though. And then I moved into working for the school district. I was an interpreter. So that was a lot of fun. I learned a ton. I definitely don't want to have kids. But I learned a lot about the school system in the U.S. because I wasn't familiar with it, right? And I learned to advocate for parents because I was interpreting for them.
Yeah.
So I also learned as an interpreter that I had to stay neutral at the same time,
right.
So it was this like really fun play of my morals and how it was built. Then after the school district, I moved into a company I was doing sales, and they did hydraulic and pneumatic work holding devices. So my territory was Mexico. So being bilingual in the Midwest helped a ton.
Yeah, you were like one of...
Oh yeah, for sure. And I got paid more. That's awesome. That's why I advocate so much for parents to teach their kids other languages because opened so many doors.
Right.
And so no, to answer your question, I was in the corporate world for a long time.
And then what was the point that you were like, forget all this stuff, let me try to do something on my own, or let me create this. What was first? Did you create, the Snoozeit first, or did you create like your own brand as a photographer? Did you what was first and why? Why did you?
Photography was first.
Okay.
Because I've always had a love for photography. Since when I was 17, I saved up, bought my first camera, and I wanted to capture photos. When my parents divorced, my mom stopped taking pictures of us. She forgot. She didn't have time. She was trying to raise 3 kids. So I wanted to capture those moments because I didn't have them. So I started doing photography on the side with my corporate job, with college. I was taking pictures. And then I always, every single job that I had, I always wanted to fix things. The way that they function, the way that they talk to, the way that they manage their humans. I always had this I wanted to fix stuff. But you're kind of not at the top, so whatever.
What can you do?
Yeah. It was okay, and I would always suggest things, and they were okay, do your job though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I always had this urge to make things better, but it wasn't my company, so I couldn't do it. So that was always a frustration that I had. And when I graduated college, I moved to San Diego, and I found another corporate job in a startup. And that was a lot of fun because you get to wear a ton of hats.
Yeah.
I mean, a ton.
And you're probably heard a little bit more, right? Because you're not your suggestions or what you're adding value, or you feel like you're adding value more than a bigger place or right, a more political structured place.
Totally, 100%. But then I saw the company grow. So I was their 6th employee. Wow. Ended up being one of I don't know how many after when I left, and I got to witness the bureaucracy that grows once a company gets big.
Yeah. And
so that also working in the startup, and I learned a lot from my former boss, a lot. Good things and things that I promised myself that I would never do.
Yeah. And
so that's when I left, I realized I couldn't work for anyone else anymore. Yeah. Because I was done trying to fix other people's problems that they didn't want to fix.
Right.
So I went on and fixed them myself.
And that's the start of not your photography, but more of your brand strategy.
My brand strategy. Yeah, because at that point I'm a graphic designer.
Yeah.
Excuse me, and I had always had a side job. Always. And that's when I knew, that's how I knew that I wasn't cut to have a corporate job, because I never understood how I had colleagues that would go to work and then go to the gym or do whatever and then go home and go to sleep. And I always go to work and then go to the gym or do whatever and then do something else for me, do my side thing. Yeah. Whether it was, I dabbled in so many things. But I always had something that I did for myself, and so I knew. Yeah. I just knew, and I was really frustrated with wanting to fix more things that weren't getting fixed. Yeah. And then I had a team, and so I always felt frustrated that I couldn't do things with my team as I wanted them, because I had to pass them through someone, So, yeah.
So through any of this process of you starting your own thing, going through the corporate world, what were some things that you did to kind of, I guess, bring yourself back to your center, so to speak? So right, you might get lost as a woman of color in Missouri, being one of the only Latinas probably, in a predominantly white state, or college or, corporate environment. How did you deal with some of these, did you have feelings of that?
A lot.
It didn't belong, or, and how did you deal with that going through this process?
I had a lot of feelings of not belonging when I was in college, a lot. Especially because I moved from, it's a whole new country. Mm-hmm. And it's not LA or California. Yeah. Because I tell people that I know a lot of people that live in California, that are from California, that have not lived what's the word? Leave or live?
Have not left.
Left, yes. They have not left California. That I'm like, if you go anywhere else in the country, it's a completely new, different world. So I totally felt out of place. And what my just mechanism, like just internal mechanism, I looked for other people of color.
Yeah.
So I had lots of black friends, lots and lots, because that I mean, they're closer to me, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, but I also have a lot of white friends, and I met, and it's funny because I learned to own my identity and to really honor where I came from.
But how did you do that? I feel like people don't like
share how that happened.
and they don't have these like tools, right, to know, okay, this is what somebody else did that might, I might be in the same situation. So like, how does somebody, kind of own their identity if they're feeling a little lost or just out of place?
Well, I had to look back and remember where I came from.
Yeah.
So I'm a dancer. I've always danced, and I started salsa dancing. That's how I started meeting brown people, because brown people go salsa dancing. And so I started looking for the things that felt like home.
Right.
So what felt like home was dancing salsas and cumbias, and remembering the mornings of your mom cleaning the house on Sunday, whatever. So I started looking for those paths that brought me back home.
Yeah.
And when those paths weren't there, I started bringing people to that. So for my friends in college, I would cook Mexican food. And then they'd be like, this is so weird because they're not hard tacos. And I'm like, well, hard tacos don't exist.
Yeah.
Just so you know, they're not real.
Yeah.
So that's how I brought myself home, is by bringing home back to me. Does that make sense?
And yeah, I mean, some people lose it, right? Like some people don't speak their truth, right? They kind of go around and kind of fake it till you make it, right? But I think it's cool. Yeah, it's cool that you were able to kind of like just share it with everybody rather than like keep it for yourself and be like, I'm just gonna hold it and not speak about it, right?
Totally, and that's something that it's always been in me, to be proud of who I am, and I like to disrupt. I enjoy that a lot.
Yeah.
Actually, and so I would walk into places and start speaking Spanish because I can. Yeah. And
you don't care. You don't care.
No.
Which is good. Yeah. Like a lot of people should have that trait, right? But sometimes it's hard, right?
But it's as hard as you want to make it.
Yeah.
And I got yelled at many times. I mean, I remember, and I've shared this before, I was at Walmart with my aunt, with my tia, and we were speaking Spanish, and this lady behind us, she was like, I wish these damn Mexicans would learn how to speak English. And I turned around and I said, well, we do.
I guess it's one of those things that's the reality that we deal with, and it's unfortunate, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
When actually, you mentioned my mom, and so this is one thing that I think this is going to answer the how. So I always, when it comes to advocating for myself, I always think of my mom and my grandmother. Because my grandmother, when she lost her husband, she was in her 20s. She got married when she was 14.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it was those times.
Yeah.
And so she was in her 20s, and she had to leave her children in Mexico and come to the U.S. to work.
Wow.
And I've yet to interview her. She's refusing. But she has this incredible life of resilience that, I mean, just if you're a mom, just imagine leaving five children behind and getting a phone call saying one of your kids drowned. You have to come. So to me, when it comes to advocating for myself, I always think of advocating for my grandma.
Yeah.
So when I would walk into really white spaces or spaces where Spanish was not in the picture, I would walk in and be like, I own it.
Yeah.
Because I'm doing it for the women behind me.
Yeah.
And for my mother and for my grandmother that they couldn't fight for because she didn't speak the language.
Yeah.
So I speak both, and I'm going to own both because I can.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Maybe that's does that answer your question?
No, I think it's amazing that you look back and you look at the sacrifices that that your grandma made, and that gives you strength, because you're so like much. It's something that I'm, like you said, you're fighting for them. You're that's what they wanted to do, but they were unable to, and so you're the next in line to keep that going.
Totally.
And so going through that probably was super satisfying, right? Like, you probably, at the end of it, you probably were like, dang, I really did, I'm doing something now that, that is impacting a lot of these, because you work primarily with businesses owned by people of color, right? With your brand strategy.
Oh, right now, yes.
And so your impact is probably, so much more. So how does that feel now, like having that impact and that reach, and kind of being able to disrupt and make this, change that you want? How does that feel for you?
Well, it feels like I'm not, it's funny because I feel like there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. I feel like, especially with my background in corporate, I mean, every single business that I worked for, every single boss that I had was a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying, where are my people?
Yeah.
And there's room for everyone. And so that's why I'm so passionate of help right now, to help people of color own businesses, because we need to rise. Yeah. And I saw in the corporate world how people still, like, once you get to a certain level, you start believing it. You remove the lack mentality and you receive the abundance mentality of, like, there's everything for everyone. There's abundance everywhere.
Yeah.
And I saw that in that space, and I see the lack of that in the people of color owned businesses.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of trauma that we have to get through.
Right.
I mean, I always look back and I think of the times when our ancestors were taken from their possessions, from their culture, from their life. And so all that trauma, we're carrying it. And so now, I mean, it makes sense when I go to the mom and pop shop and I ask them for a vendor, and they're like, oh, I'm not going to tell you because that's my vendor,
Yeah.
But it's so prevalent still. But so I think there's still a lot of work that we have to get through. There's a ton of beautiful people now doing the things that are helping and uplifting others. Yeah. And so how I feel is, I feel like we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, we do. And it shows in what you're doing, right? It shows in, like, the community that we've seen, right? In these spaces, who put on panels, who have podcasts, who, we're just trying to lift each other, right?
Yeah.
So getting into your other businesses.
Yes.
So you talked about brand strategy, you talked about photography. Let's talk about your other two, your podcast and then your Snoozeit phone wallet. Is it a phone wallet? Or
it's a fabric pocket that lets you live outside your phone.
There you go. and is that something that you just, like, initially started as a side thing and now it's a majority of what you do, or is it still like that's? So I'm trying to figure out how it all together.
Happened.
Yeah.
So the podcast started first. I was in corporate world. I was in the corporate world. I was traveling a lot because I was doing trainings, corporate trainings, and I was dealing with a lot of traveling. And so during my travels, I would listen to podcasts because I'm a forever student. So I'm always learning new things.
Yeah.
And so I would listen to podcasts. I love interview-based podcasts because I think it's just so cool that you can basically dive into people's conversations and just listen.
Yeah.
It's so cool. So I would always listen to interview-based podcasts, and I realized that the people that were being interviewed, that were doing amazing things, none of them looked like me. There were very few that looked like me. And then when people that looked like me were brought on, the questions that were being asked weren't deep enough for me.
Yeah.
So because the interviewers had nothing in common, or they just didn't know the struggle.
Right.
Yeah. So I was like, where are the people of color? Who's interviewing them? Nobody was. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it.
Your disruptor mindset.
Yeah,
like,
I was like, I'm going to do it.
Yep, that's awesome.
It took me a long time to start because I had a lot of limiting beliefs around starting a podcast because, number one, I was like, I don't know audio. I don't know how to edit.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to do it because I don't know how to do it.
So is this where you started your recovery from procrastination?
No, my recovery from procrastination started in college. Because well, I was been a procrastinator.
Yeah. Well, I know you use that term, so just trying to
bring it back on.
Yeah, tied it all together.
So my recovery from procrastination started in college when one of my professors looked at me and she said, "You know, this project is good, but if you had put the time, it would be really good."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh shoot."
And then you put the time when you started.
No, I didn't.
When you started your podcast.
When I started the podcast, I procrastinated 3 years.
Wow.
And so then I met a friend of mine, Henry. He was my first producer, my first editor. And I was talking to him and I was like, "Look, I want to start this podcast. I'm ready." And it's funny because 2 weeks before, I put a microphone on my vision board. And I was like, I don't know what this is going to be. I'm a trained public speaker too. So maybe it's going to be public speaking. Maybe it's going to be podcast. I don't know what this is going to, it's funny how those things happen. So I was like, I don't know what it's going to be, but I put a microphone up there. And 2 weeks later, I'm having a conversation with Henry and I was like, I really want to start a podcast. The only thing that's missing is the editing. Yeah. And he was like, I'm a music producer. What do you need? And I was like, oh,
let's go.
The universe is saying you have to do that.
Yeah.
So that's how I did it. And I mean, I have not stopped.
That's awesome.
Since then.
Yeah.
So it's a podcast.
Yep. And then Snoozeit.
I was photographing a client. I was doing documentary photography for a while. And documentary photography is when you do a day in the life. So you photograph people and you're a fly on the wall. So you go and you photograph their life. So I was photographing a beautiful client of mine, a mother-daughter trip in Arizona, a high-end spa in Arizona. And they do an annual trip. And while I was there, I noticed that at the spa, Oprah has been there, right? So this spa they were inviting you to put your phone away and disconnect and be present.
Yeah.
And so they had these stations for you to leave your phone. And so as I was shooting, I was photographing, I was like, this is crazy. People are paying thousands of dollars for somebody to tell them to be present. What? And so again, my disruptor mindset. And also, I thought about my people and how we don't always have access to these expensive spaces.
Yeah.
I was like, well, how can I give access to anyone to be able to be present? Because it's something that's so needed. I've been doing a lot of internal healing work with my traumas and stuff, and so I know the importance of being present, and I know being present also helps with procrastination. So I was like, what can I do? So that night I came home and I put on my journal, fabric pocket, sleeping bag for your phone, I just journaled. And I didn't know where that was gonna go. So 6 months later, I am, one of my friends, Luz Warrior, shout out to Luz, she invites me to be to participate in an event. So I was teaching a class, a dance class. So during our planning meeting, she said, I'm going to invite everyone to put their phone away and disconnect. And I was like, okay, light bulb, So I called her after the call and I was like, Luz, so 6 months ago, I journaled this thing.
This is the universe again.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the things that I have created, it's because somebody else has sparked it.
Yeah.
I don't believe in self-made people. I believe that there's always an army of people behind you that have pushed you to do it.
Yeah.
So I called her after and I was like, okay, so this is the idea. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know the name of it. I don't know, but it's the thing that lets you and helps you disconnect. And she was like, I love it. So I was like, I want to launch it at your event. Perfect. I had 5 days. So, yeah. So,
wow.
Yeah, I called my mom and I was like, okay, Mom, you have time? I need you to be 100% with me for 5 days. And she was like, okay. So I designed it, I named it, branded it, sourced the fabric and all this stuff, created the prototype, and created, painted, and finished 50 in 5 days.
You sold out of those 50.
Well, I sponsor them. So
Okay.
I sponsored the 50
Okay.
for the event. And then I taught at the event. So,
Yeah.
so that was a little insane. But that's how Snoozeit was born.
That's
and
awesome.
people have loved it. And when somebody asked me, well, who is Snoozeit for? Frankly, it's for anyone who has a phone, but really it's for those people who are looking to be present.
Yeah.
So lots of healers love the Snoozeit because I should have brought mine and put my phone in it, actually. Lots of healers, when they do their sessions, they put their phone, and because the pocket is wide enough to fit two, they invite their clients to put their phone in there too. Lots of yoga studios love the Snoozeit because they always invite you to be present.
Yeah.
So it's turning into a more holistic thing. But the cool thing about the Snoozeit is that I'm working with women in Mexico. It's a group of deported moms and the name of that is because they are women who have been deported and they live in Tijuana, and their children live in the US.
Wow.
So they live in Tijuana because it's the closest they can be to their children. And they are also women that have experienced trauma of leaving their country that they've been, some of them, for most of their life.
Yeah.
And so they get to Tijuana and then they have to find jobs. They don't know how to navigate the country. So I'm working with them. They're the ones making it. And then I bring it back and I pay them in dollars. I pay them in pesos, but I pay them a fair wage because I want to make sure that they're able to provide. And it's really cool because they like that they can. They always tell me it just takes their mind off the stuff.
So they're the ones putting it together.
Sewing it now.
Do they have? Do you share a story with the Snoozeit that you sell, or is that?
Yes. So. Well, what do you mean?
Does each one have its the person who's making it does their story follow the Snoozeit as well?
Yeah. Well, we're working on the logistics for that because yes, I want every single one of them to put really their mark there, and whoever is using it, not only do they know that they're being present, but they know that they're supporting somebody.
That's cool. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, so thinking about longer term, so. What are your next steps? What are the things you're working on? I know you have a huge event in June, but I guess a huge event in June, maybe in 3 years, 5 years. How do you see all of this for you and yourself?
That's fun. So the podcast it's going to continue. I want the podcast to continue to be just the force that spreads the voices.
Yeah.
I want Snoozeit to be successful and to really support the women because right now it's a small support.
Yeah.
I want Snoozeit to be wholesale. I want Snoozeit to be in every yoga studio, in every school. I want it to be in every office meeting, and when people use it, they're going to know that they're also helping somebody else, not only themselves. I want my brand strategy to touch 10,000 people and small businesses and really help them put the soul and the heart in their business. Yeah. And because with the brand strategy, what I see a lot is that, I'm that person. You create, entrepreneurs solve problems. So you see the problem, you go solve it. Yeah. And then the structural side of the business gets kind of we'll get there when we get there. Yeah. So that's when I work with clients is I help them create the structure of their business so their brand is really solid and the message is correct and everything gets super clear so the business runs smoothly. So I want to touch a ton of people and help them elevate themselves.
That's awesome.
Because we need it.
Yeah, no, that's the dream, right? Is we are here. Our why is to elevate the community that we come from, right? And so that's amazing. Your story is amazing. Just in the fact that you've been hustling your whole life, from the time.
Start working at 13.
Yeah, you've been hustling your whole life, and you've obviously have that mentality of you can do more, right? You can do more for the community. You can do more. What else can I do? How else can I help? So that's awesome. Do you have any advice for entrepreneurs who might be starting out, who might have some similar feelings that you felt along the way, like what are some pieces of advice that you would give them, kind of looking back at what you went through?
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind right away is the imposter syndrome, because I got it a lot, and it actually the imposter syndrome stopped me a lot from. I mean, I didn't start the podcast for a long time because I wasn't
and the imposter
good.
syndrome, just in case somebody doesn't know, it's something that you feel like you shouldn't be there, right? Like you feel like you shouldn't, like you don't belong, or
you're an imposter.
Like
Who are you?
You don't deserve it. Yeah.
Yes. So the imposter syndrome is that feeling of not enough, of you're not enough to do this.
Yeah.
So why do you even try?
Right.
And I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've seen it with my clients, it's so prevalent, especially in people of color, because we have a ton of traumas to get through. Because whether you want it or not, you're working for the people behind you.
Right.
Like I'm pushing traumas that my mom is not gone through, or that she's not pushed through, I guess. And for things that my grandma, so we have a lot to carry.
Right.
And so one thing that helped me a lot is always to, and it's a fun exercise to do, and it's like pretty powerful. So when I think of I'm not enough to do this, I put it on someone I love. And I always think of my niece, for example. She's 8, right? So I always think like, okay, Chloe, you're not enough to run a business, right?
Yeah.
So all the things that I'm telling myself. So Chloe, you're not enough to run a business. You're not good enough to put together an event. What are you thinking, right? And so then putting it on her, I'm like, nope.
Yeah, like why? Yeah.
So then that switches your mentality so much.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't say that to someone you love. So why do you say that to yourself? So I would encourage people to do that exercise, especially if you have kids. It works even better if you have kids, because then moms are like, oh, no way, you're not going to say that to my kid.
Yeah.
So use that exercise when the imposter syndrome.
Yeah, because a lot of times you're in your own head, right?
All the time.
You are your biggest enemy.
All the time.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up our conversation. Thank you for joining us. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to share your story.
Thank you.
Been great.
I'm glad. I'm happy that you brought me on, and I'm happy for the awesome things that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's great.
Awesome.
Thank you.